Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Native Bidaské. Yesterday, actually Thursday, the Supreme Court rendered its decision on the Haaland. Let me start over, Kristen. Welcome to a special edition of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, publisher, editor of Native News Online. We call this a special edition because on Thursday, the decision by the Supreme Court, the Brackeen versus Haaland case the decision was rendered, it was delivered, and it was very positive for Native Americans. By a 7-2 margin, the court decided that the Indian Child Welfare Act will stand. So we have a special guest, but joining me is our staff reporter, Neely Bardwell. Good morning, Neely.
Hello, Levi.
And we have Samantha Skenandore. She's out of Wisconsin, and she works with Corus Bradley, and she is an expert in so many different areas of Indian country, but certainly the ICWA, she's so familiar with it, and she's actually lived it. So welcome, Samantha. How are you today?
Good morning, Levi. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hey, just give us your overall reaction to the decision.
Well, it's goofy. We've been waiting for months for this decision. And, I'm sure every Indian lawyer out there was clicking the refresh button on the Supreme Court page, as I was. So yesterday I had a pit in my stomach for the first time and thought, this is going to be the day. And as I was clicking on the website, I got a phone call and my phone started blowing up from clients and friends and colleagues about the decision coming down, and that of course it was upheld 7-2. So I was on the spot, quickly trying to peruse the case, and finally, after all of the excitement started to go down a little bit, I just unplugged and read the decision. I had to read it from beginning to end to see what was going on, because 7-2 was shocking. I don't think anybody anticipated this. In fact, I'm coming off the cusp of going to the National Congress of American Indians mid-year last week in Minneapolis, or outside Minneapolis at where were we at?
Mystic Lake,
Shakopee, and talking to tribal leader after tribal leader. I mean, the tensions were high. You could literally feel the tension in the hallways of mid-year, in some of the rooms, even when we weren't talking about Brackeen or the Supreme Court or those sorts of issues. People were leaning over saying, hey, did you see or hear anything about Brackeen? So everybody was just on alert, high alert in Indian country. All the leaders were just bracing for, devastation. And, I've heard everything from, wow, we need to reform how we do our membership, to we need to run down to the state legislature and really reform our state versions. We need to revise our agreements with the state, everything. We need to go lobby. We need, who are the people using for lobbying on this? I mean, people were, tribal leaders were frantically thinking about all of the different ways that they could respond to a really bad outcome for the case last week. So hearing this was shocking. And I just had to figure out why we did so well with the 7-2 outcome.
I was so pleased. And Neely, what was your reaction when you heard it yesterday?
It was definitely a sense of relief, for sure. And then the more I thought about it, the more then I felt a little bit angry that was even challenged in the first place. But with that, this case had a lot of implications for tribal sovereignty. If it was voted down, then that basically meant that our nations weren't sovereign. And like you said, you heard a bunch of tribal leaders going over the different ways that we could, do damage control and make sure that we protect our children as much as possible. So, and I'm so glad that this is not a reality. But what were the tribes doing to protect their sovereignty should ICWA be dismantled?
Yeah, I think my honest perspective, just watching, ICWA come into play in 1978. Little Samantha was 5 years old back then, but this stuff way preceded us. The Indian Removal Act. They had we had relocation programs from the federal government to implement and integrate and assimilate our tribal And I have a grandmother on the Cherokee side who was sent up to Ohio, for example, raised an entire family in Ohio because they wanted them to work in these industrious other jobs and assimilate into, urban settings and move off the reservation and not be dependent or be tied to that community. So there were just a plethora of federal policies that really tried to take tribal members off of the reservation, integrate them into mainstream American society, and then also take the kids. And so, I think our ancestors from all these nations, back when things were happening, getting pretty dicey and noticeable back in the 50s, perhaps even before that, these folks that were looking at tribal governance saying, gosh, we need to, at the very least, protect the children, at the very least. And I think that sentiment rose decades later into the ICWA. And so the ICWA became something where all tribes had this uniform effort to say, we need to keep our children intact because our children are our membership. That's our tribe itself. If we can't protect them, what can we protect? And so that stemmed into these cases. And have we ever abandoned ship? No. I think we always knew that, Morton v. Mancari and ICWA, of course, and all the foundational seminal Indian law cases that really distinguish between political status and racial status were really always going to be at play and available for attack from anybody down the road. And again, we don't have a crystal ball to say what any administration will think. We also don't know case precedent in the future. We only know what we know now in 2023. And we can say, gosh, we'd really like to think, this case had twofold issues. One is, does Congress really still have the relationship we think it has? Could it really enact this law over domestic affairs involving children? And two, is our sovereignty still intact? Where we get to say, this is our kinship in our tribe. This is how we this is the fabric of our community. This is how we see our aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, mothers, extended fathers, uncles, nieces, nephews, all of those relationships that we have been, experiencing and greeting each other for centuries. How does that all go away in accordance with state law? Do we have to are our children prone to the best interest standards? That's a foreign kinship relationship in reality. And it's a very warped version, which does not specifically give you the cultural ingredients that ICWA affords those families.
Samantha, let me ask you a question in terms of how Native Americans should be viewed, because I honestly don't believe the average American understands this. They want to put us in this racial category, and some of us even sometimes slip and talk about minority, the race, and all that. But really, we're political entities as tribes, correct? I mean, can you kind of distinguish that for our viewers so they can really understand why this case was really important in maybe even future cases?
Right. So tribes have always had the right, before this whole American concept came into play on the land, to get rid of its tribal. They decide who their membership is. They decide who comes in and who leaves. So they've always done expulsion for different reasons. In fact, here's what I would say to the 2023 crowd that's new to Indian sovereignty, to say, we decide who our memberships are, and we decide when they aren't going to be members anymore. We can decide second-class citizenship if we so choose, right? I am enrolled in my tribe, and my tribe can kick me out tomorrow because for any reason, right? If they pass a law, I can look like this. I can have an old card from my tribe, but I could not be a tribal member.
How many turquoise rings you have in your fingers? I'm teasing.
Just one big one. Just one big one. And how many tribal cards do I have in my wallet? Just one, right? But somebody can pull my card, and that could, so that's political, right? And the other thing we're going to learn, and we've already started learning during this drug epidemic, where tribes have been exercising their right to exclude people from the reservation and even take people off the rolls. If you are a drug dealer bringing drugs on reservations, we see tribes passing resolutions for states of emergency. We see them taking them off the rolls. We're seeing them disallowed on tribal lands. So yes, we've been doing this for a really long time, and we're going to see more of it as Indian country has to deal with these epidemics and these substance abuse issues and learn what's best for their community and set up their own safeguards.
So what is your experience personally with ICWA? I think everybody has a story or a relationship with it. Would you care to explain more?
Sure. And I would be doubtful that there is any tribal people, any tribal citizens that don't know somebody are not part of a story of ICWA. I would doubt that that's the case. And that's how effective ICWA is. And I can't pronounce that more than anything else, because when ICWA came down, I thought, good gosh, I don't think the rest of America understands what a huge impact this law has. I mean, we're sitting here looking at, a couple dozen cases where adoptive parents or the state feels they've been infringed upon, right? And it's just a couple dozen, right? I mean, that are raised to this level. Of course, a lot of those could be more. And we think about the time and money it takes to litigate, and that these are children, they grow up and then they become meritless at some point in the system. So we have to understand that. But at the same time, we also should stop and pause and say, what does ICWA do? And not just what doesn't it do the best, what does it do? And what it does do is it keeps families intact. It keeps the traditional kinship at play. And it keeps tribes where they've always been in the driver's seat to decide who their families are and who their members are. And when they are able to decide that, that is an exercise of sovereignty, but it also is the long-term survival of that tribe. Without those things, if you don't have those things, what are you? Are you even a tribe anymore? And are we falling into play of termination without the act? Yes, we absolutely would have been. I mean, we were looking at numbers, and I'm glad to see that, even in the court's opinion, they cite some of those statistics about, somewhere between 25% or a third at the time they passed ICWA of children were farmed out to non-Indian families. A third of Indian country gone and removed from Indian family touches, communications, daily activities, seasonal obligations, clan duties, all those things, completely not a day-to-day norm for them. And on the flip side of that, I think every one of us, I don't even know if I would say everyone, again, there's probably nobody that's not been touched by another person coming to them or crossing paths with them somewhere in this world saying, I think I'm Native American. I was adopted out. I ended up here. I was with a non-Native family. I don't know which tribe I belong to. And I could say in my experience, I'm nearly 50 years old. I probably helped at least a couple dozen people find their tribe, get enrolled. And these folks have almost always gone back to their communities on a regular basis. Some have worked, some have become general counsel to their own tribes, attorneys, that didn't even know which tribe they belong to. They've reconnected some way, shape, or form, somewhere down the road. And when you talk to them and you get to know them as human beings, you realize, gosh, there's like 10, 20, 30 years of disconnect that's just ailing this person. And how hungry they were to latch onto me or anybody who might know a little bit about tribal enrollments or might know a little bit about the tribes out there, or might be able to piece together what they think they know about their family history and get them back home. They have this yearning and quest. So I think we all know those people. We know a handful of those people and sometimes a couple handfuls of those people. And you think, gosh, these are the people where ICWA failed, right? ICWA, as wonderful as it is, it still isn't perfect. People still slip through the cracks. They absolutely do. And people, we are even in the process, even with the federal law, even with, the federal regulations and the state regulations and the tribal compacts and agreements, all those different pieces that are supposed to make sure nobody slips through the cracks. Absolutely. And will people still slip through the cracks with ICWA? Absolutely. We're still going to miss people. People are going to be, pulled away from their communities. There's going to be some people that are doing this in a purposefully and malicious way, to have their own interests appeased. So this will continue to affect Indian kids, and they will hopefully come full circle back to their communities at some point in life. But this is the point of the law, and it's such a beautiful thing. So you asked me what my personal story is. My personal story is after law school, I aimed to be a foster parent. So the first thing I did, even before I took the bar exam, was I went out and got a foster license at my tribal social services department. And while I was studying for the bar, I got a call and said, hey, Samantha, we have this child. She's a teenager. We have emergency placement. It's a Friday night. I'm still at work being a silly workaholic, thunderstorm out. I don't know if it's 5:30 or 6 on a Friday night, no kids, just a dog at home, no food in my fridge, just bottles of water. And I get this call to say, hey, we have a kid. And I said, well, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. I could take the kid over the weekend. We'll look for extended family, of course, per ICWA, right? Next week, we'll see where we can place this kid. So the kid comes in 45 minutes later. So yes, I had a 45-minute pregnancy. And my now daughter came to my home and came in that night, very upset. It was a tough transition, as is most of the times when there's emergency extraction. It's some dire situation, and it was a dire situation. But over time, it wasn't a matter of months before I was called into court, for my foster child's case. And when I got there, I said, I don't know what's going on. Why am I here? Did something happen? I thought we were doing very well. And my child had that was now 15 had petitioned the court to stay with me under permanent guardianship under the court's rules.
Wow.
And I was not told. It was a surprise to me. So I was, of course, crying in the court, excited that she was choosing me despite all of this craziness. And of course, the court, after they did the trial, that all went through. So I had permanent guardianship of the younger kid. This child had 2 more siblings, just one a year older than her, and another 2 years older than her. So when, this kid came into my life, so did the other 2. And these are all kids from my community. And they were actually children of a relative of mine. And under our kinship, she was my sister. And under our kinship, these children were my children. And I had a clan and a female responsibility, a mother responsibility to these children upon birth. So that was already in place. So that was why they were placed with me. It matched our kinship, and they stayed with me on and off. Of course, the youngest one all the way through college. So we're very close. I talk to them nearly every day. I actually have my second oldest over at the house with the 3 grandkids. So I have 7 grandkids now. And their lives were tough. And they have that complicated story of Native kids that were raised in non-Native settings, not connected with their Native families, and yearning for that upon me meeting them, and having the easy ability, when I take it for granted that my family's traditional, that my family's fluent in their language, and that I have access to these resources, and to see them come in and say, wow, you don't have that. Let's just go. We're just going to go do this. So yes, it's very personal to me. And if you talk to them in hindsight, and when Brackeen got filed, certainly, me and the older children were sitting around talking about Brackeen and how Brackeen happened. How did this work with these non-Native adoptive families, and what were they seeking, and what would that mean for them if they never met me, or if the tribe never asserted jurisdiction and placed them with me? What would have happened to them? And I said, really honestly, what would have happened to you guys? And 2 out of 3 of them said, we'd be dead. We don't know. We don't think we would have made it. And so that's a very personal story to say, in hindsight, but for this, it's hard to think about it, and in 18 or so years later, they're now mature enough to say, we know what probably would have happened to us had we not been reintroduced to our tribal family and introduced to our culture and taken in that way and learned that about ourselves.
Samantha, that was a personal story, but a very touching story as well. I mean, yeah, I got a little tear in my eye as you were talking, and man, that was pretty powerful. So the decision on Thursday was just so important. Do you feel like it could potentially be threatened again in terms of it seems like the right wing, the Goldwater Institute that's out there that was named at after a Senator Barry Goldwater, who actually voted for the Indian Child Welfare Act back in the 70s. So that has always baffled me, and it's like they need to stay out of our business. That what I would say as a native writer. How's that? But do you feel like this is over now, or do we still need to be careful and prayerful and all that good stuff?
Yeah, when you lock things up with a 7-2, you think, gosh, we nailed it. Gorsuch's opinion reaffirming Indigenous rights. Again, always a champion. He was, same day decision for Coughlin that came out for Lac du Flambeau here in Wisconsin about the bankruptcy code applicability to Indian country. And of course, the majority said that did apply to tribes. And Gorsuch said, no, these guys are tribes. So he's still standing for tribes. And what would Ruth Bader Ginsburg say, right? But she's not in the court anymore. So that's the reality, Levi, is we have to look at what we might think will be the crystal ball. We do know one thing for sure in Indian law, and that's the pendulum swings. We talk about this, beautiful pendulum that goes for pro-tribal self-determination, self-governance, and it, goes and has to take a spin at some point, pivots back to, anti-tribal government, anti-sovereignty, sometimes termination, and sometimes, things that are worse than that, that have dire impacts to tribes. So we can look at distinct periods within the body of federal Indian law that shows how that pendulum swings back and forth. And a lot of scholars, I think, when I got out of law school in 2005, were saying, hey, the pendulum's it's due to swing. And here we are, almost 20 years later, seeing cases like this. When this popped up, we're thinking, gosh, we're really overdue here. We had our big win with our real estate case down in Oklahoma. The Supreme Court got stacked a little differently here. We have new justices. RBG's gone. What can Gorsuch do to convince his colleagues, if anything, if at all, about these cases in front of him? And of course, the biggest case we would think of is this race versus political status. Like that would be, to me, low-hanging fruit, this equal protection claim that was part of the Brackeen cases, and why the Supreme Court took it. We were hoping and thinking, the lowercase holdings that would support the upholding of ICWA would at least keep it in check. But, the appeal into the Supreme Court, this was looking at dismantling the entire Indian Child Welfare Act, not just a piece of it, all of it. And it was also looking at dismantling the authority of Congress and case precedent over Indian law. So this could have devastating effects, not just on our ability to protect our children and keep them intact with our tribal communities, but it also could have dismantled and questioned this race versus politics, which would have affected all kinds of things that are in play right now, preference in contracting, housing, education, every other aspect that the federal government relies upon to meet up to its federal trust responsibilities to tribes. How would that all change? How would that resurface? What would be the transition period? It could have been a very scary, elongated termination period that none of us would outlive that's on this call today. So it could have been really, really bad. And again, if you take some time and read Thomas's 40-page dissent, you see how he attacks some of the major case precedent. And he's got a long record of taking issue with Congress's authority and questioning what plenary power is. Is it absolute? Is it not absolute? Is it logically flawed? Do we need to figure out what the boundaries are? Well, at the end of the day, maybe we don't. Maybe we need to just realize that the states have always had discretion and authority, policing authority over domestic affairs. So why not for Indian kids? And he says Indians are citizens of the United States. Indians live off the reservation. Why should they not be subject to state law like any other child is? So he makes these, very next era. We're assuming we're all assimilated and we don't and can't value that connection to those tribal communities. It's no longer that important. Maybe a tribe desires that, but it's really not that important at the end of the day for the best interest of a kid. And he makes those arguments in his dissent. And it's interesting that that's where he focuses things because, listening to, and I didn't get to go to the oral arguments on this in last November, and I'm not sure if you folks did, but, the large focus and the bulk of that hearing was about the best interest, where the tribes and had spent a great deal of time to try to paint the picture for the court that this is why the connection really matters. This connection that you can't find in state law. You can't leave it to the states because they're going to get it wrong. There's no way in the states could never come up with a scheme to understand and value those children being with Native families and within Native communities. And then that's one thing I also take issue with. I take issue with Thomas talking about us being, Natives being urban Indians and being off-res and living under state jurisdiction all the other times of our lives. Well, we do have dual sovereignty, right? I'm a citizen of the Ho-Chunk Nation and I'm a citizen of the United States. Just because I step over here does not mean I am no longer a citizen of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And that's where I think things go awry, right? And I also think, who decides where I step? All of America is Indian country. I live here in Madison.
I love that.
I live in Madison, Wisconsin. This is one of our biggest strongholds. There's a reason why most states have a state capital in the middle of the state so the citizens of the state can actually physically get and travel to their state capital. Here in Wisconsin, it's down here in Madison. Why is it in Madison? Because it's the best city in the entire world. And because it traditionally has been, an intercouncil meeting place for tribes long before it was Wisconsin. This is a place where the South American tribes, the Western, the Eastern tribes would come and congregate and stay here on the isthmus I'm sitting on right now across the street from the state capitol. And they would converge and talk about intercourse, trade, family and domestic relations, right? All of these things happen in this land. And so who's Thomas to say that I'm not Native and my own Native city, metropolis
Exactly.
of the Midwest while I sit and work here. I'm Native wherever I go. And that, thankfully, in our tribal law, under our Ho-Chunk traditional laws, you are Ho-Chunk wherever you are. And that is why Ho-Chunk doesn't have a reservation. We refused all through all of those ugly times of, the IRA and all the reforms, that we said we're not going to give ourselves a reservation. But, the Congress tried to move us, 9 different times. Minnesota, Nebraska, and we all walked in our moccasins back to Wisconsin and said, no, this is our lands, so we're going to live. And that's why, Ho-Chunk doesn't have one intact reservation, because we are Ho-Chunk wherever we go. I can go to Antarctica and I'm still Ho-Chunk. I can live and work as a professional attorney here in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm still Ho-Chunk. And so when I read that from Thomas's decision, I'm like, oh, really? You forget that I know where I'm at and my tribe knows where I'm at, and their laws should apply to me, where, especially involving domestic relations, for the reasons of my personal story earlier.
Well, we just have a couple minutes left. Neely, you have the last question.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a question I completely forgot. Oh, so this case started with a non-Native family who argued that they shouldn't be discriminated against, when it comes to adopting a child. So what do you have to say? Because I feel like obviously this case didn't get as big as it is if that was the only non-Native family who believed that. I mean, what do you have to say, in response to that argument that, they argue that they can take care of the Native child just as well as anybody else? And I think, that's not the full argument, right? The full argument is the fact that we should get to decide what happens to our children, right? So what is your response to, those non-Native families that do hold that belief?
So I will say the practicality of your question is that we probably don't have enough Native families to take in all the kids that need a place to be, whether it's temporary, short, medium, or long term. We also know that kids don't transition well, that it's best for them to always go to one staple place, perhaps with mom and dad, mom or dad, and then back to the staple place. And that's the idea of foster care. And I think the subtle nuance that you're talking about is, and I'll say, and I'll even meet these parents halfway. I think there are fantastic non-Native parents in Indian country. There is a plethora. I can give you 20 names of non-Native folks that have taken on Native children, 1, 2, or 3 siblings. And you see them at every cultural event. You see them active in the community. You see them in their regalia. You see them named and feeling a part of their community. And they don't need to be Native to do that. There are very good parents that are non-Native that can accomplish that as well. And we see it in all of our tribal communities. So I'll give them that and I'll meet them halfway. But I will say that the reality is really a sovereignty thing, is that it should be the tribe to decide that if it's a non-Native family, again, it's a preferential. They are not excluded. I say they are not excluded. They are a last case scenario, right? That we know, proven through our existence and through our knowledge of the wellness of our families. And that's where the sovereignty comes intact. That tribe knows what's best for the existence of its people, for the well-being of its people. And when you undermine that and you say the state gets to decide that, the state gets to decide, here's a wealthier non-Native family, or here's a Native family who promises to take these Native children back to their community and participate in cultural events. And we're going to do it from afar. We're going to do it from Texas to Wisconsin, right? Like, they make these egregious promises to give this kid what they think is a cultural connection. And that's where the tribe says, no, we want to be able to say that. If we're going to say it's these parents with these circumstances, then we want to be in control of that child's welfare. And if that doesn't work out, right? If that doesn't work out, we'll have a plan B and a plan C, right? And that's sovereignty. That's sovereignty to say, we decide if you are the bright parent to do these things or not. Again, if we've gone through the measures of immediate family, other families, other Native tribes, and then you, they get to go through that process, and they get to, at the moment of time with those children, they get to scour the resources that are available at that time. And that should be for the tribes to do. They've always done that. They've always done that. And for the states to know what that is, and for these families, the non-Native families that pledge to do this, again, there are wonderful non-Native families in Indian country. And yes, these kids will continue to go to non-Native families because there are not enough resources in most tribal communities. So that's the reality of it all. But it again, should be, the driver's seat should be held by the tribe.
Samantha, you are such an expert in this. And as I said earlier at the beginning of this episode, you are expert in so many different areas in Indian country. But I want to thank you for coming on, because you've given some great perspective to the decision. And I hope you'll come back, extend the invitation to come back. If you ever have any subject, we do this every week, and we offer you to come back and see us when you can, or want to even amplify something that's close to your heart. So
Sure.
it's all about improving Indian country and that's kind of our mission here at Native News Online. So Chi Miigwech for coming on today, and we really appreciate you coming on. Any last word?
No, I want to show you something really quick. Not a last word, but a last image. Hold on.
Okay.
So this is what I'm talking about. This is the senior picture of my youngest daughter who graduated here in Wisconsin.
That is incredible.
That's what ICWA does.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank
As
you.
I say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That was awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good luck. Keep reporting the good news.
Thank you. And to our viewers, thank you, Chi Miigwech, for tuning into another edition of Native Bidaské. This was a special edition because of the Brackeen versus Haaland decision that was decided and released on Thursday of this week. And we hope you come back next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Have a safe week.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chi Miigwech.